Welcome to Note Lab Mode. We're your shortcut to being well-informed, without all that information overload.
Exactly. We cut through the noise, get straight to the insights that actually matter, helping you understand the forces shaping our world.
And before we jump into today's really crucial topic, a quick thank you to our sponsor, CloudFit.ai. Imagine if influencer content wasn't just, something to look at, but something you could act on instantly.
Right. Like seeing an outfit and buying it right there.
That's exactly what CloudFit.ai does. It connects those influencer outfits directly to your product inventory, makes the content instantly shoppable.
Which means more sales for businesses and likely a higher average order value, too. It really transforms that inspiration into actual revenue.
It's a genuine game changer for e-commerce. Check them out at CLOUTFIT.ai.
That's CLOUTFIT.ai. Definitely worth a look.
Okay, so today we are diving deep into the really profound shifts happening right now in the Middle East.
And this isn't just, another chapter in a long story. It feels like a completely new book has just been opened.
It really does, especially following this direct and frankly unprecedented military action by the United States.
So we're going to unpack the complexities here. The Iran-USA-Israel triangle, what scenarios might play out, the global and regional impacts.
And importantly, we'll offer some practical considerations, especially for those of you listening in places like the UAE or Cyprus, which are very much in the vicinity.
Yeah, understanding what this means for global stability, for energy markets, even for, daily life. It's critical right now.
We're seeing a fundamental recalibration of strategy, of boundaries. This isn't just a regional flare-up, it's got global shockwaves. Grasping the nuances is absolutely essential.
Absolutely.
And just one more thing before we get started. If you find this deep dive valuable, if it helps you connect the dots, please think about sharing it with a friend or a colleague.
Yeah, anyone who values staying informed. And subscribing, of course, helps you catch all our future insights.
It really does help us keep bringing you this kind of research. Okay, let's unpack this new geopolitical landscape. How has this conflict been so utterly transformed?
Well, for decades, you had this simmering rivalry between Israel and Iran. Mostly a Cold War fought through proxies, clandestine ops, the drill.
Right. Israel always saw a nuclear Iran as an existential threat, a red line.
Exactly. And that drove everything: intense lobbying in D.C. and Europe, preemptive strikes against suspected Iranian nuclear sites or defense facilities. It was this long, drawn-out chess match, very calculated.
Trying to maintain a balance, however fragile.
Precisely. And then October 7th, 2023 happened, the Hamas attack on Israel.
Definite turning point.
A critical one. Israel didn't just see it as a horrific attack. They saw it as a direct result of Iran's axis of resistance.
That network of proxy groups, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis.
Exactly. All designed to project Iranian influence and challenge Israel in the U.S. So that attack fundamentally shifted Israel's strategy. They went from containment, is trying to keep Iran and its proxies in check,
to something much more aggressive.
to active dismantlement, their term. Dismantling what they call Iran's ring of fire, that network of proxies surrounding them.
And our research shows they didn't wait long to act on that.
Not at all. Direct Israeli strikes inside Iran started as early as June 13th this year. And these weren't just symbolic taps.
No, they were hitting critical infrastructure.
Yeah, nuclear and defense sites. We saw reports, pretty credible ones, of senior IRGC commanders, even nuclear scientists being eliminated. Plus, efforts to degrade Iran's air defenses. That itself was a major escalation.
Pushing the boundaries. But then came the real game changer.
That's right. The truly unprecedented moment. Sunday, June 22nd, 2025, the U.S. launches Operation Midnight Hammer.
Direct U.S. military strikes on Iranian soil.
Against three absolutely pivotal Iranian nuclear sites, Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. And the scale, the precision, it's remarkable.
They use B-2 stealth bombers.
Advanced B-2s, yes. And those massive 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs designed specifically to penetrate deeply buried facilities.
Wow. So this marks the first direct U.S. military involvement in this specific Iran-Israel conflict, right?
Yeah.
Not just supporting Israel, but actually striking Iran.
Correct. And it was a massive operation. Our research indicates over 125 U.S. military aircraft were involved.
Over 120?
14 of those huge bunker busters, plus more than 24 Tomahawk cruise missiles.
That is astonishing. It completely changes the nature of the conflict.
Fundamentally, it moves it from proxy wars and shadow boxing to direct, overt confrontation between major states.
It redraws the lines, shows willingness to hit Iran's core assets. directly.
And what's really fascinating, geopolitically speaking, is how this challenges Iran's whole doctrine of extended deterrence.
Explain that a bit. How did that doctrine work?
For years, Iran basically used its regional influence, its proxy network, as a shield. The idea was, don't hit us directly, or we'll retaliate via our proxies, or hit your interests in the region.
The sort of deniable threat.
Exactly. But this U.S. action shows that even their most protected, deeply buried facilities, the ones they thought were maybe invulnerable, are now demonstrably within reach. That's a stark message.
A very stark message. What does this signal to other countries in the region thinking about nuclear capabilities? Like Saudi Arabia, Turkey.
It's complicated. It could be seen as the U.S. doubling down on preventing Iranian nuclearization, maybe reassuring some allies.
Yeah.
Or it could be seen as a warning about the extreme risks of going down that path yourself in such a volatile area.
So it puts huge strain on the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT.
Absolutely. It challenges the credibility of the whole framework. It might even set a new, more aggressive precedent for how non-proliferation is enforced, a really fundamental shift.
Okay, so that brings us to the current situation. The military and political stances of the key players right now in the immediate aftermath. Let's start with Israel. What are they saying and what are their underlying goals?
Well, publicly, Israel is reporting significant success. Their military is claiming they've badly degraded Iran's air defenses, hit their missile capabilities hard, and damaged nuclear enrichment sites.
And their stated objective remains the same.
Yes, complete dismantlement of Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile programs. They see those as existential threats. Full stop.
But there's likely an unstated goal, too.
Oh, almost certainly. The widely understood, though unstated, objective is to destabilize the Ayatollah regime enough to potentially trigger an internal collapse. It's not just about the hardware, it's about the regime itself.
And Prime Minister Netanyahu called the U.S. attack a crucial turning point, saying Israel will continue operations. That sounds pretty definitive.
It's strong language, absolutely. From Israel's viewpoint, this direct U.S. action is kind of the culmination of decades of lobbying their main ally to act decisively against Iran.
A moment they've been pushing for.
Exactly. They see it as validation of their long-held fears about Iran's nuclear ambitions.
Now, shifting to the United States, this is a huge step. Direct engagement in a conflict they tried to avoid for so long. What does their military presence look like right now?
It's substantial. Truly substantial. Tens of thousands of U.S. troops spread across permanent bases in the Gulf region, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE.
Plus air power.
Significant air power, advanced fighter jets like the F-16 sent to Saudi Arabia, robust aerial refueling capabilities, and a major naval presence.
You mentioned destroyers, carriers.
Yeah, the USS, the Sullivans, the USS Thomas Hudner, the carrier USS Carl Vinson is there, and the USS Nimitz is apparently on its way. All these assets are on high alert, obviously.
And the messaging from Washington. Initially defensive, but President Trump's warnings to Tehran sounded tougher.
Right. The initial statements framed it as defensive, about protecting Israel, but subsequent warnings demanded de-escalation from Iran while also signaling a readiness for deeper involvement if Iran retaliates significantly.
What's driving this approach under the Trump administration that seems different?
It is different. This direct intervention really moves beyond past U.S. approaches that often leaned more on multilateralism or cautious engagement.
More unilateral.
It aligns with what we've seen, prioritizing swift, decisive outcomes, a willingness to act unilaterally if deemed necessary. There's often a transactional feel to engagements and definitely skepticism towards multilateral frameworks.
And the decision to bypass Congress for this strike.
That underscores the point perfectly. It points to a belief in decisive, direct action, perhaps seeing this as the strategic move to stop Iran's nuclear path and strongly back Israel.
But this unpredictability,
Yeah.
it must create ripples, especially with traditional allies, say, in Europe.
Absolutely. It introduces more uncertainty. Allies who prefer multilateral diplomacy, more measured responses, they now have to adapt to a more assertive, sometimes unilateral U.S. stance.
Or risk being sidelined.
Exactly. On critical issues that affect their own security and economies, it's a big shift in alliance dynamics.
Okay, let's look at Iran's reality in all this. After taking hits from Israel and now this major U.S. strike, what's their situation? How capable are they right now?
Well, based on our research, the assessment is they have limited options for retaliation at this point.
Limited. Why?
Their best air defense systems, the Russian S-300s, were reportedly taken out in earlier Israeli strikes. That severely hampers their ability to defend against more attacks. And crucially, their proxy networks.
The axis of resistance?
Yeah, described now as considerably depleted, even a shadow of what it once was. This leaves them with fewer conventional tools and weakened asymmetric options.
But they have to project strength domestically, right?
Exactly. The leadership is under intense domestic pressure to look strong, to respond, but they have very little room to maneuver or make concessions given their weakened state.
And they've condemned the strikes very strongly. Grave violation, everlasting consequences, asserting their right to defend sovereignty.
Oh yes, the rhetoric is strong, but they're in an incredibly tough spot. They need to respond, but their toolbox is much smaller now.
So, this strategic challenge, it's a profound dilemma for Tehran.
It really is. On one hand, they absolutely must retaliate forcefully to maintain legitimacy domestically and regionally. Not responding looks incredibly weak after a direct U.S. hit.
But on the other hand,
Their conventional military is outmatched by the U.S. and Israel, and their asymmetric tools, the proxies, are degraded.
walking a tightrope then.
An incredibly fine one. They have to show resolve, but without triggering an overwhelming U.S. counter-response that could genuinely threaten the regime's survival.
So what does that likely mean for their response? What kind of actions might they take?
Given that balance, the likelihood increases for actions that are maybe highly symbolic but limited directly, or more deniable asymmetric moves.
Like cyber warfare.
Cyber warfare, yes. Or maybe using transnational criminal networks for covert ops. Things that let them show they're heading back, save face, but maybe reduce the risk of an immediate, massive military escalation they can't handle.
The specific nature and scale of whatever they do choose will tell us a lot, won't it? About their stability, their risk tolerance.
Absolutely. It'll be a critical indicator of the regime's thinking and its assessment of U.S. willingness to go further. A moment of huge strategic calculation for them.
Let's explore those potential responses. Direct military retaliation first. The high-impact, high-risk options. Targeting U.S. bases and personnel seems high on that list.
Definitely. Iran has explicitly warned about irreparable damage to U.S. interests if the U.S. got involved. And look at the map. U.S. troops are in Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE.
Much closer to Iran than Israel is.
Significantly closer, meaning much less warning time for any attack. Iran's defense minister flat out said all U.S. bases are within our reach. That's not subtle.
No, it's a direct threat. What about hitting oil and gas infrastructure in the Gulf? That feels like a classic asymmetric economic blow.
It is, and Iran has the capability and arguably the motivation. They could target critical facilities in Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar. We saw the precedent in 2019.
The drone attack on Saudi oil sites.
Exactly. Widely blamed on Iran. It temporarily cut Saudi production in half, sent markets reeling. Another attack like that.
Could disrupt a huge chunk of global supply.
Over 20% of global oil and LNG flows could be impacted. That could easily push oil prices up to $150 a barrel, maybe even higher. The economic fallout would be immense globally.
And missile barrages against Israel, they've done it before. Is that still a credible threat?
Well, the intensity seemed to decrease as Israel targeted their launchers, but it's generally believed Iran might still have some of its more potent missiles, like the multi-warhead Khorramshahr-4, held in reserve.
So despite the damage, they might still have that capability.
It's likely still an option, yes. Especially if they feel they need a direct, visible response against Israel itself. It's high risk, high cost for them now, but probably not impossible.
Okay, beyond direct military strikes, there's asymmetric warfare, activating proxies. Even if the axis of resistance is weakened, what can they still do?
Our research suggests that while the network is weakened, maybe a shadow of its former self, it still has considerable capabilities for causing trouble. Even a degraded network can inflict real damage if directed strategically.
So the Houthis in Yemen, for instance, what role could they play now?
The Houthis still have a sophisticated arsenal missiles that look very much like Iranian designs. They had threatened to resume attacks on U.S. ships in the Red Sea if the U.S. got directly involved.
And Yemen has now declared support for Iran.
Explicitly. And warned foreign ships away from their waters. So the potential for renewed attacks impacting shipping, especially near the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, is very real. That hits global trade hard.
What about Iraqi militias? Groups like Kataib Hezbollah. They operate in a complex environment.
They do, and they've openly threatened to hit U.S. interests across the Middle East. What makes them particularly dangerous is their foothold within Iraq's political structure, especially the Shia-dominated parts of government.
Giving them cover, essentially.
A conducive environment, let's say. It could make it easier for them to increase missile and drone attacks on U.S. bases in Iraq. Ain al-Assad, Erbil, maybe even into Syria, that risks destabilizing Iraq further.
And Hezbollah in Lebanon. They were a major force. Are they still a factor or truly sidelined?
Their missile arsenal took a massive hit from Israeli strikes last year, according to reports. Key leadership was impacted too. Some analysts think large-scale involvement now is unlikely. Lebanese officials are certainly pushing them to stay out.
Lebanon can't afford another war.
Absolutely not. But Hezbollah has warned that direct U.S. military involvement would change the context and could push the region towards an explosion. So maybe not initiating, but if things escalate dramatically, if Iran feels truly threatened, it's not impossible they could act, despite the cost. A very fine line.
Cyber warfare. That seems like a go-to option if conventional means are limited. How potent is that threat from Iran?
Still very potent. It's relatively low cost for them, potentially high impact, and offers deniability. Iranian-linked groups have a history of targeting U.S. infrastructure, private companies.
And the economic damage could be huge.
Potentially massive. Hundreds of billions, maybe even over $1 trillion, depending on the targets hit. Financial systems, power grids, transport. It's a serious vulnerability.
What about attacks further afield, using criminal networks, things like that? Is that a real concern?
Our research flags this as a serious and underappreciated threat. Iran has been accused of using transnational criminal actors for covert operations abroad before.
Targeted attacks, maybe, on U.S. soil or against Jewish communities?
That's the concern. It's deniable it avoids direct state-on-state conflict, but still allows them to retaliate and project fear. Highly insidious and unpredictable.
Okay, let's talk about the most dangerous potential outcome here, accelerating Iran's nuclear program. Is the fear that the U.S. attack might actually push them towards a bomb?
That is the significant and frankly terrifying concern. Iran's official line from the foreign minister is still that their program is peaceful. But many observers worry this direct attack could be the very thing that convinces them to make a dash for actual weapons.
And Russia's Medvedev even suggested some countries might help them.
He did. He suggested the U.S. attack wouldn't deter Iran, and chillingly, that others might be ready to supply nuclear weapons. That points to an incredibly alarming potential shift.
If Iran did cross that nuclear threshold, what happens then, regionally, globally?
It's hard to overstate the potential consequences. You'd likely see a dangerous proliferation cascade, a regional arms race.
Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, UAE. They might feel they need their own.
Almost certainly. To try and balance power, this would fundamentally undermine the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, which has been a cornerstone of global security for over 50 years.
It suggests the treaty could break under pressure.
Exactly. Leading to a world with potentially many more nuclear-armed states. A profoundly unstable and dangerous scenario.
Given all this, understanding the possible paths forward is critical. Our research outlines several probable scenarios. Let's walk through them, starting with the most likely one.
Right. According to our analysis, the most probable outcome is Scenario A, limited retaliation and diplomatic de-escalation. We've put about a 50% probability on this. Doesn't mean it's risk-free, but it avoids the most catastrophic immediate escalation.
Okay, so in Scenario A, Iran's response is measured. Symbolic, maybe deniable, enough to save face, but not enough to trigger a massive U.S. counterattack.
Precisely. Think limited missile strikes on Israel, maybe causing minimal damage, or perhaps minor cyber attacks on U.S. or allied systems disruptive, but not crippling. Some low-level harassment via proxies, maybe.
And crucially, signaling they're eventually willing to talk.
Yes, using these limited actions to show resolve, but ultimately paving the way back to negotiations, maybe seeking leverage later. The U.S. in turn maintains a strong defense, but holds back from more offensive strikes into Iran.
The Trump administration might see this as mission accomplished, degrading the nuclear program, showing resolve, and be open to de-escalation.
That's plausible. They might see it as a quick win and prefer to de-escalate after achieving that core objective.
What about the global powers here? UN, EU, Russia, China. What's their role when diplomacy takes center stage?
They'd all intensify calls for de-escalation. The UN Secretary General would stress diplomacy is the only path. The EU, UK, France, Germany would push hard for restraint, negotiations, emphasizing international law.
Russia and China would condemn the U.S. strikes but offer mediation.
Yes, Russia would likely offer to mediate, boosting its diplomatic profile. China would also condemn the U.S. action, push for a political solution, primarily focused on stability for trade in the Gulf.
And regional powers. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE.
They'd all express deep concern, constantly urging restraint. Key mediators like Qatar and Oman would work behind the scenes, trying to facilitate dialogue and prevent things from boiling over again.
So, if scenario A plays out, what are the consequences? Economically?
Global oil prices would stay volatile, maybe spike initially, but wouldn't likely spiral completely out of control. They'd probably settle at a higher level than before. But insurance costs for shipping would rise. Investor uncertainty would linger, impacting big projects like Vision 2030 or Dubai's growth. Regional economic forecasts would stay subdued.
And security-wise, still tense.
Very tense. Full-scale war averted, but deep mistrust remains. The U.S. keeps a large military footprint as a deterrent. Increased security precautions become the norm across the region, impacting travel, daily life.
Politically, the Iranian regime holds on but faces pressure, and the NPT is strained, leading to tough diplomacy ahead.
Exactly. It's a managed crisis, not a resolved one. A tense but perhaps manageable outcome.
Okay, let's move to scenario B, intensified regional proxy conflict. This has a 30% probability. Here, Iran feels unable to retaliate directly but heavily activates its remaining proxy networks.
Right, leading to a significant jump in asymmetric attacks across the region, making it a much more dangerous place day to day.
So what does Iran specifically do in this scenario? How do they use those proxies?
They'd likely direct them to ramp things up significantly. Houthis intensify Red Sea attacks on shipping, maybe targeting Suez traffic. Iraqi militias increase missile and drone strikes on U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria.
Using criminal networks, too. Cyber attacks.
Potentially, yes. Using transnational criminals for deniable attacks further away, and a major escalation in cyber operations against critical infrastructure in the U.S. and allied nations, aiming for disruption and economic pain.
How did the U.S. and Israel respond differently here compared to scenario A? More aggressive.
The response shifts. Still defensive interceptions, yes, but likely more limited targeted retaliatory strikes against specific proxy assets or leadership, trying to degrade their ability to attack, deter more actions, but still trying to avoid a full-scale war with Iran itself, and reinforcing their own military posture even more.
And Israel.
Israel would likely get more aggressive with its counter-proxy operations, maybe hitting more targets in Syria or even Lebanon if Hezbollah steps up activity despite being weakened.
What's the impact on Gulf states and Iraq in this scenario? They're right in the middle.
Gulf states, UAE, Saudi, Qatar would have to seriously beef up defenses around their energy infrastructure and those crucial U.S. bases. Iraq's government would face immense internal pressure, potentially destabilizing further as these militias operate more freely.
The economic hit sounds much worse here, especially if Hormuz or the Red Sea are consistently threatened.
Much worse. Significant, sustained disruption to oil supplies. If the Strait of Hormuz is seriously threatened, oil prices could easily spike and stay high, maybe $100 and $120 a barrel or more, for a long time. Shipping costs soar globally, insurance premiums skyrocket. It would put a real chill on regional investment and development.
Security risks escalate across the board. And humanitarian impact.
Yes. Widespread security risks, U.S. bases, energy sites, shipping lanes, a much higher risk of miscalculation leading to unintended direct conflict between states. Humanitarian impact would be more localized but severe in places like Yemen, Iraq, Syria, where proxy fighting intensifies.
All right, now for scenario C, direct. Wider military confrontation. 15% probability. This is the catastrophic one. Full-blown conventional war.
This is triggered by a direct, significant, overt Iranian attack on major U.S. military assets or critical Gulf infrastructure. Something undeniable.
So Iran takes a huge gamble here, aiming for major damage.
Exactly. A large-scale missile or drone attack targeting a major U.S. base like Al Udeid or Al Dhafra, or a critical oil facility in a Gulf state. Aiming for significant damage, potentially significant casualties, an unambiguous act of war.
And the U.S. response would be overwhelming.
Overwhelming and devastating. Extensive airstrikes deep into Iran, hitting military sites, command centers, strategic infrastructure across the country. The objective shifts from degrading capabilities to potentially forcing regime change. More carriers, strategic bombers, an all-out conventional response.
Israel joins in fully.
Provides full political and military support, likely conducting simultaneous or coordinated strikes.
The regional powers become the battleground.
Literally. Gulf states face direct attacks. Catastrophic economic fallout. Their territory becomes an active war zone, populations at direct risk. U.S. allies like Kuwait, Bahrain are directly involved due to bases. Syria's neutrality vanishes.
What can global powers even do in this scenario? UN, EU, Russia, China.
Their diplomatic influence shrinks dramatically. Strong condemnations, calls for ceasefires, yes, but limited ability to actually broker peace. Russia might even supply advanced weapons to Iran, making it worse. China's economic interests get hammered.
Economically, this triggers a global recession, doesn't it?
Without a doubt, catastrophic disruption to oil markets prices way above $150, highly volatile, severe damage to global trade, supply chains collapse, worldwide recession. Gulf economies face existential fallout, trillions in losses, development wiped out for years.
Security-wise, full regional war, high casualties, risk of nuclear proliferation or materials getting loose.
All of the above. High casualties, military and civilian. Significant risk of proliferation if Iran feels cornered, or if nuclear material isn't secure during chaos. Spillover via cyber attacks, terrorism globally, massive humanitarian crisis, huge refugee flows, long-term instability reshaping the entire region, a nightmare scenario.
Finally, scenario D, Iranian regime destabilization. Only a 5% probability, but still possible. Internal collapse in Iran due to the conflict's strain.
Yes, a prolonged, intense conflict, severe economic hardship, humanitarian suffering, all potentially fuel internal unrest to the point where the regime struggles to maintain control.
How does that unfold?
Mounting dissent, potentially widespread civil unrest. The regime's external power fades as it focuses on survival. A decisive Israeli victory, especially with U.S. help, could trigger a legitimacy crisis, hastening collapse or fragmentation.
And the U.S. might subtly support opposition groups. What about Russia and China?
The U.S. might see an opportunity, yes. Russia would view regime change as a major strategic loss, undermining its influence after already losing ground in Syria. China would be deeply concerned about its investments and the Belt and Road Initiative. Chaos there hurts them badly.
And the repercussions.
Yeah.
Inside Iran and regionally.
Immediate, profound destabilization within Iran. Civil conflict, fragmentation, a power vacuum, huge geopolitical shifts across the Middle East, very uncertain outcomes. New non-state actors could emerge.
And the nuclear risk.
The critical concern, nuclear material or expertise falling into the wrong hands during the chaos. Economically, more chaos in Iran, severe ripple effects across the region. Profoundly destabilizing.
Beyond the main players, Iran, U.S., Israel, this conflict really shifts the calculations for everyone else in the region and globally. Let's touch on some key countries. Saudi Arabia.
They're walking a fine line. Condemned earlier Israeli strikes, expressed deep concern about U.S. strikes, but no outright condemnation. They desperately want stability for Vision 2030, trying to balance U.S. security ties with complex Iran dynamics. And the nightmare scenario for them is a nuclear Iran, which might push them to get their own bomb.
Qatar, hosting that huge U.S. base, Al Udeid, but also wanting ties with Tehran and acting as a mediator.
An incredibly tricky position. They regret the tensions, urge restraint. They value their role as a neutral mediator, essential for their standing and economy. Condemned Israeli strikes, stated no attacks would launch from the U.S. base on their soil. Protecting their neutrality is key.
Iraq must be terrified of spillover.
Absolutely. They condemned the U.S. strikes as a grave threat, risking escalation on their own soil. Their primary interest is internal stability, avoiding becoming a battleground again, especially with those Iran-backed militias operating there.
Syria's new leadership is staying out of it.
Deliberately. Severed ties with Iran post-Assad. Focusing on reconstruction, seeking neutrality, aligning more with Gulf states for economic help. They see this as someone else's fight.
Lebanon. Still fragile, economically devastated.
Desperate to avoid being dragged in, the president warned the U.S. bombing could lead to unbearable regional conflict. Hezbollah, though weakened, warned U.S. involvement changes everything. Preventing another war on their soil is paramount.
Yemen's Houthi rebels, still a key part of Iran's network.
Very much so. Condemned U.S. strikes, called for jihad, declared support for Iran, warned ships away. They want to project power in the Red Sea, disrupt shipping, align with Iran, and generally stir instability.
Russia, they condemn the U.S. strike strongly. What's their angle?
They see it as a gross violation, typical anti-U.S. stance. Medvedev made those chilling comments about nuclear proliferation. Putin offered mediation. Strategically, it's mixed for them. A distraction for the West, maybe higher oil profits, but also risks nuclear chaos. They worry about regime change in Iran undermining their influence.
China. Huge economic interests at stake.
They condemned the strikes, called for de-escalation, political solution. Stability in the Gulf is vital for their trade, energy imports. Positioning themselves as peacemakers, contrasting with the U.S., Iran is important for Belt and Road. They want stability, not war, but will try to shape things diplomatically.
The European Union, focused on diplomacy.
Absolutely. Top diplomat urged restraint. UK, France, Germany tried diplomacy before. They see negotiation as the only path, urging Iran to engage. Regional stability, migration, trade, energy security all threaten for the EU. Preventing proliferation and wider war is their main goal.
And Turkey, navigating carefully.
Very carefully. Express deep concern but stop short of condemning U.S. strikes. Oppose a nuclear Iran, advocate diplomacy. Erdogan positioned himself as a mediator, offering Istanbul for talks, trying to balance ties, protect their own security and economic interests, maintain leverage with everyone.
Okay, let's really focus now on two specific areas deeply affected where many listeners might be. First, the United Arab Emirates, the UAE. Close to Iran, hosts U.S. military assets.
Yeah.
Very vulnerable.
Extremely vulnerable. The economic impacts are already being felt. The IMF has already slashed the region's 2025 growth forecast down from 4% to 2.6%, citing these tensions. That's a big hit.
And the long-term costs could be astronomical, up to $1 trillion for the Gulf if this drags on.
That's the potential scale, yes. A sustained conflict, loss of foreign investment, delays to mega projects. It could, as one official put it, erase years of economic progress, undoing all that diversification work.
The UAE economy relies so much on trade, tourism, investment.
Exactly. Disrupted trade routes, soaring shipping insurance, investor uncertainty all hit the UAE hard. And if energy infrastructure is targeted or the Strait of Hormuz blocked, that's over 20% of global oil LNG. Our research calls that catastrophic damage with direct and existential fallout for the UAE. It threatens their whole economic model.
Truly existential. Security-wise, hosting Al Dhafra Air Base, Jebel Ali Port being a U.S. Navy hub, puts them right in the potential line of fire.
Directly. If Iran chooses to retaliate against U.S. bases, those are prime targets. Makes the UAE inherently vulnerable in a direct confrontation scenario.
The U.S. State Department still has a Level 2 travel advisory, urging caution.
Yes, exercise increased caution due to regional tensions, risk of attacks. But importantly, the U.S. Embassy and consulate remain fully operational.
And the UAE leadership has been working the phones, pushing diplomacy.
Intensely. President Sheikh Mohammed, others, calling leaders, emphasizing dialogue, de-escalation, trying to shield the region from devastating consequences. The foreign ministry constantly stresses diplomacy. Also, their nuclear regulator is monitoring Iranian sites, reporting no impacts on the UAE so far, which is reassuring regarding immediate fallout.
So for people actually in Dubai right now, what are the key practical recommendations?
Number one, stay informed. Monitor official news, government advisories from the UAE and your home country. Reliable info is key.
Review emergency plans.
Definitely. Update personal and family plans. Know safe gathering points, communication protocols. Have an emergency kit ready: water, food, first aid, important documents. Good news is Dubai apparently has 90-day emergency water reserves showing good preparedness.
Financial preparedness.
Good idea to have some liquid funds for immediate needs. Be ready for maybe temporary disruptions to banking or higher costs if supply chains get hit.
Travel disruptions are possible too.
Very possible. Airspace closures, flight cancellations across the region. Have alternative travel plans if you might need to leave. Keep passports and documents ready and valid.
And day-to-day awareness.
And maintain a low profile. Be extra cautious in public, especially near military sites or places popular with foreigners. Be aware of your surroundings. Report anything suspicious. And make sure you have reliable communication, local SIM, roaming, internet apps.
Okay, now let's shift to Cyprus. Strategically located, but playing a different role. More humanitarian, logistical.
Exactly. They've been crystal clear about their neutrality. The defense minister stated firmly, Cyprus will not become a base for military operations. They limit activities to humanitarian aid, peacekeeping, helping evacuate foreign nationals, a safe transit point.
And it's already been functioning that way, helping people evacuated from Israel.
Yes. Thousands have already used Cyprus as a transit point or temporary shelter. It's fulfilling that role already.
What about the British bases there? Akrotiri and Tekilia?
They are strategic assets, no doubt. But the Cypriot government insists they are not to be used for offensive operations in this conflict. Defensive, intelligence gathering, yes, not launching strikes. And their National Security Council is continuously monitoring everything.
So what are the implications for Cyprus as this continues? Its humanitarian role gets reinforced.
Definitely. It solidifies its image as a stable, reliable haven in a turbulent region. That requires strong logistics and support capabilities on their part.
Economic impacts, even if they're neutral.
It's still possible. Fuel prices could rise due to market disruptions. Travel and trade links with the Middle East could be affected if tensions escalate further, impacting tourism or imports-exports.
Security still needs vigilance, though, being close to the hotspots.
Absolutely. They maintain vigilance. Recent arrests related to espionage targeting the British bases show that. Proximity requires ongoing precautions. Diplomatically, they keep pushing for diplomacy, trying to be a bridge for peace.
So, for residents or visitors in Cyprus, what are the key takeaways?
Monitor travel advisories, especially for flights from the Middle East. Understand Cyprus's role. It's a safe haven, a transit point, not a military player here.
Emergency preparedness still wise.
Always have a personal plan, essential supplies. Cyprus has identified over 2,000 safe rooms and bunkers, which shows good national preparedness, and follow local authorities' instructions on safety and security.
Okay, so we've covered a lot today. A deep dive into this huge shift in the Iran-USA-Israel conflict, driven by that direct U.S. military action.
We looked at the strategic thinking behind it, the wide range of possible Iranian responses from limited moves to potential full-scale war, and the ripple effects across the region and the world.
And we focused on the real-world impacts and preparations needed in places like the UAE and Cyprus, helping you understand how these big geopolitical events touch ground level. Diplomacy is crucial, but so is deterrence and defense right now.
It's a tense balance.
And as we look ahead, this unprecedented redrawing of strategic lines leaves us with a fundamental question, doesn't it?
It really does.
What does this mean for the future of international agreements like the NPT? And how might this event permanently change what we even mean by stability on the world stage? Could this be the start of a whole new era in global norms?
A question that will definitely shape international relations for years, maybe even decades. Profound implications.
Thank you for joining us on NoteLab Mode. If this deep dive helped you connect the dots, please do share it with others who value being well-informed.
And hit subscribe so you don't miss our next one.
And thanks again to our sponsor, cloutfit.ai. Revolutionize your product sales by visiting clousit.ai.
We'll be back next time with another deep dive into the research that truly matters.